In the heart of a winter that had draped the world in a thick blanket of white, a story began. It was a story not of kings or castles, but of something far more real and, in its own way, far more magical. A journey. It was a story of 9 friends, their hearts bright with the fire of youth and adventure, setting out to greet the wild, untamed beauty of the Ural Mountains. Their leader was a young man named Igor Dyatlov. He was only 23, but he carried the quiet confidence of someone much older. He was a student of radio engineering, a mind that saw the world in patterns and logic, but his soul belonged to the mountains. He loved the clean, sharp air, the challenge of the climb, and the silent companionship of the peaks. He planned this expedition with meticulous care, charting maps, calculating rations, and choosing a route that was ambitious but achievable. It was to be a Category 3 expedition, the highest difficulty, a true test of their skill and endurance, and they were all eager to prove themselves. With him was Zinaida Kolmogorova, known to everyone as Zina. She was the heart of the group, her spirit as bright and warm as a campfire on a cold night. She had a smile that could melt snow and a laugh that echoed with pure joy. She, too, was an experienced trekker, strong and capable. Her diary, a constant companion, where she poured out her thoughts and observations, painting pictures with words of the vast landscapes they traversed. Then there was Ludmila Dubinina, or Luda, as she was known. She was often found with a song on her lips, her voice a soft melody against the whisper of the wind. She was romantic and deeply felt the beauty of the world around her. She saw poetry in the frost on a window pane and a story in the shape of a cloud. Her camera was always with her, capturing moments of laughter, struggle, and breathtaking beauty. Yuri Doroshenko was another of the Yuris in the group. He was known for his playful nature and his loyalty. He and Zina had once shared a romance, and though it had faded, a deep and gentle friendship remained. He was the kind of person who would give you his last piece of bread without a second thought, his presence a steady comfort to them all. Alexander Kolevarov was a student of nuclear physics, a quiet, thoughtful man with a serious expression that often broke into a sudden, warm smile. He was reserved but immensely dependable. When a task needed doing, from mending a ski to reinforcing the tent, Alexander was the one they turned to. He was the anchor, the calm center in their cheerful storm of activity. Rustem Slobodin, often called Rustic, was another engineer, strong and athletic, his movements filled with a natural grace. He was known for his incredible stamina and his unwavering optimism. No matter how steep the climb or how fierce the wind, Rustic would have a word of encouragement, his determination a force that helped pull the entire group forward. Nicolas Thibault-Brignol, whose friends called him Kolya, was the son of a French communist who had settled in Russia. He had a worldly air about him, a gentle soul, with a deep love for music and literature. He worked at a construction site, his hands strong and calloused, but his heart was that of a poet. Semyon Zolotaryov was the oldest of the group, at 38. He was a bit of an enigma. He went by the name Sasha and had joined the group at the last minute. He was a combat veteran, a tour guide, and an experienced outdoorsman. His presence was reassuring. He had seen more of the world, more of its hardships, than the students, and his quiet competence was a source of strength. And finally, there was Yuri Yudin. He was the 10th member, a tall, thoughtful young man who was as excited as any of them for the adventure ahead. His part in the story, however, would be different from the others, a twist of fate that would save him and haunt him for the rest of his days. Their journey began not in the snow, but on the rumbling, rhythmic heart of a train. They boarded in the city of Sverdlovsk, their packs filled with warm clothes, dried food, and the tools of their trade, ice axes, skis, and compasses. The carriage was filled with their laughter and the strumming of a mandolin. They sang songs of wandering and romance, their voices rising and falling with the clatter of the wheels on the track. They shared bread and cheese and hot tea from thermoses, their faces illuminated by the passing lights of towns and the cold, distant glitter of the stars. Zina might have written in her diary that night, her pencil scratching softly in the dim light of the train car, "The adventure has begun. The mood is wonderful. Igor is poring over his maps, Rustic is telling a joke that has everyone in stitches, and Kolya is looking out a window, a thoughtful expression on his face. I wonder what he sees out there in the dark. I see our future, a white, beautiful, and challenging path. I cannot wait to set foot upon it. They traveled for 2 days, the landscape outside the window slowly transforming. The cities and towns gave way to smaller villages, the villages to isolated clusters of wooden houses, and finally, to the endless sleeping forest, the taiga. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow, a vast, quiet army guarding the secrets of the north. Their final stop by rail was the town of Ivdel. From there, they crowded into the back of an open-top truck for the next leg of their journey to Vizhai, the last settlement, the very edge of civilization. The ride was bumpy and cold, the wind whipping at their faces, but their spirits were undaunted. They huddled together for warmth, their breath misting in the frigid air, their eyes wide with the sheer scale of the wilderness unfolding around them. The sky was a vast, pale blue, and the snow on the ground shimmered as if sewn with millions of tiny diamonds. Lyuda took a photograph of them all, bundled in their coats and hats, their faces red with cold but beaming with excitement. It was a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. In Vizhai, they spent the night, enjoying the simple pleasure of a solid roof and a warm stove. They talked with the local Mansi people, the indigenous hunters of the region, who spoke of the mountains with a mixture of reverence and caution. They told stories of the spirits that lived in the forests and on the peaks, tales passed down through generations. The hikers listened with polite interest, students of science and logic, but with a respect for the ancient culture of this place. The next morning, the true trek began. They strapped on their skis, shouldered their heavy packs, and set off, a single file of bright color against the stark white of the snow. And it was here, on this first day, that fate intervened for Yuri Yudin. A flare-up of an old ailment, a deep, sharp pain in his back and leg, made it impossible for him to continue. The decision was agonizing. To turn back now, at the very beginning, felt like a betrayal of the adventure, of his friends. They gathered around him, their faces etched with concern. Igor, the leader, was firm but kind. "You cannot continue, Yuri. It would be too dangerous." Yuri knew he was right. With a heavy heart, he said his goodbyes. He hugged each of them, wishing them luck and a safe return. "Take pictures for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Tell me all about it when you get back." He embraced Igor one last time. "I will wait for your telegram," Igor promised, referring to the message he would send upon their successful return to Vizhai. Yuri Yudin watched them go, 9 figures shrinking into the vast white landscape until they were just specks, and then nothing. He turned back towards the warmth and safety of the village, a profound sadness in his heart, never knowing that this painful farewell was, in fact, a gift. He was the last one to see them alive and well, a group of friends walking into a dream. The 9 remaining hikers pushed on, their skis gliding over the crisp snow. Their days fell into a comfortable, challenging rhythm. They would rise before the sun, the air so cold it felt sharp in their lungs. They would light their small, portable stove, its cheerful roar a welcome sound in the immense silence. They would melt snow for tea and cook porridge, their movements efficient and practiced. Then, they would pack their camp and begin the day's ski, covering mile after silent mile. The world around them was a masterpiece of winter. The snow was not just white. It was 100 shades of blue in the shadows, gold in the morning sun, and a soft, ethereal lavender at dusk. The pine and fir trees were stooped, their branches so laden with snow they looked like old men in heavy white cloaks. Sometimes they would follow the frozen Lozva River, its surface a solid sheet of ice, a natural highway through the forest. Other times they would break their own trail, taking turns at the front to cut a path through the deep powder. Their diary entries and photographs from this time paint a picture of a group in perfect harmony with each other and with their environment. One photograph shows Rustam and Lyuda building a small snow shelter for a rest, their faces flushed with effort and laughter. Another shows the group gathered around the stove inside the tent at night, their faces illuminated by its soft glow, sharing stories and jokes. Zina wrote of the profound silence. "It is a quiet that rings in your ears. There are no birds, no cars, no sounds of the city. Only the swish of our skis, the whisper of the wind in the trees, and the beating of our own hearts. It is beautiful and a little intimidating. You feel very small out here, but also very alive. They were not just surviving, they were thriving. They were strong, experienced, and well-prepared. They documented their journey with a scientific curiosity, taking geological samples and noting the flora and fauna. But they were also young and full of life. They built funny snowmen, had snowball fights, and wrote silly poems in a shared journal they called the Evening Otorten, a playful newspaper for their small expedition. One entry in the Evening Otorten read, "Latest scientific news. The existence of the Yeti is now proven. According to reliable sources, the Yeti resides in the vicinity of Mount Otorten." It was a joke, a way to pass the long, dark evenings, a testament to their lightheartedness even in the face of the demanding wilderness. After several days, they left the tree line behind, emerging into the open, wind-swept highlands. The landscape changed dramatically. The sheltering forests were gone, replaced by a rolling expanse of snow and rock, a stark and majestic world above the clouds. The wind was a constant companion here, sculpting the snow into fantastic shapes called sastrugi, frozen waves on a white ocean. Their goal was a mountain named Otorten. The name, in the local Mansi language, was said to mean, "Don't go there." But to the hikers, it was simply a challenge, a destination on a map. On their way, they had to cross a pass on the shoulder of another mountain. This mountain's name was Kholatsiachel. In the Mansi tongue, this name was even more stark, the Mountain of the Dead. It was named for an old legend, a story of a great flood that had claimed the lives of 9 hunters long ago. The hikers, being men and women of the modern world, likely saw these names as mere folklore, the romantic and slightly spooky trappings of a wild place. On the 1st of February, they began their ascent onto the slopes of Kholatsiachel. The weather, which had been relatively clear, began to worsen. The wind picked up, carrying with it a fine, stinging snow. Visibility dropped. A photograph taken that day shows them leaning into the wind, their figures braced against the power of the elements. It was a struggle, but one they were equipped for. In his diary, Igor Dyatlov noted the deteriorating conditions. He wrote that the rising storm made it difficult to see their next landmark, the peak of Otorten. They were losing the light. He made a decision, the kind of sound, logical decision a good leader makes. Instead of pushing on in the poor visibility and risking getting lost, or retreating back down to the tree line and losing a day's progress, they would make camp right there, on the exposed slope of the mountain. It was not an ideal location, but it was a safe tactical choice. They were tired, and a warm tent and a hot meal were what they needed. One of their last photographs captures this moment. It shows several of the hikers digging into the snow, carving out a level platform for their tent and building a low wall of snow to protect it from the wind. They are working together, their movements purposeful. There is no sign of panic or distress. It is simply the end of a long, hard day's work. They pitched their large canvas tent, anchoring it securely against the wind. Inside, they would have shed their skis and outer layers. The stove would have been lit, its warmth slowly pushing back the intense cold. They would have prepared their dinner, likely a simple but hearty meal of soup and crackers. They would have changed into dry socks and sweaters, preparing for the night. Zina and Yuri Doroshenko might have been updating their diaries. Alexander Kolevatov might have been meticulously checking their equipment for the next day's journey. Semyon, the veteran, might have been quietly observing, his presence a silent reassurance. Outside, the world was a storm of white. The wind howled over the dome of the mountain, a deep, mournful sound. The snow swirled in a disorienting dance. But inside the tent there was a small pocket of warmth, of light, of human companionship. They were 9 friends, safe and together, on the cusp of achieving their goal. They finished their meal, packed away the stove, and settled into their sleeping bags, lying side by side in the long tent. The only light would have been a single flashlight or a candle, casting flickering shadows on the canvas walls. Then, that light, too, would have been extinguished. They would have fallen asleep to the sound of the wind, a lullaby of the wilderness, dreaming of the summit they would conquer the next day. And this is where their story, the one they were writing themselves in their diaries and photographs, ends. This is the last moment of warmth, the last moment of certainty. From this point on, the story is told by the silence they left behind, by the clues scattered in the snow, a quiet and deeply perplexing puzzle. Days turned into a week, and then 2. Back in the city, families began to worry. The date for Igor's promised telegram, February 12th, came and went. At first, no one was overly concerned. Delays were common in such expeditions. A storm could hold a group up for days. But as more time passed with no word, a quiet dread began to grow. By the 20th of February, it was clear something was wrong. A search and rescue operation was launched. Volunteer students, teachers, and eventually the Army and Air Force were mobilized. Planes and helicopters began to scour the vast, empty wilderness from the air, looking for any sign of the 9 hikers. On the ground, experienced mountaineers on skis began to retrace their route, following the faint tracks they had left in the snow. For days, they found nothing. The mountains kept their silence. The searchers followed the group's trail from the abandoned Manzi camp, up through the forest, to the edge of the tree line. They found the places the group had camped, marked by the remnants of small fires and discarded food wrappers. The trail was clear, logical. It led them upward, onto the windswept slope of Kholat Syakhl. It was on February 26th, nearly a month after the hikers had made their last camp, that a search pilot spotted something unnatural from the air. A dark shape, a collapsed patch of canvas, on the otherwise pristine white slope. A ground team was directed to the location. As they approached, a strange and unsettling scene came into view. It was the Dyatlov group's tent. But it was not as it should be. It was half buried in snow and had collapsed. The first, most baffling clue was that the entrance, which faced downhill and away from the worst of the wind, was still securely fastened. No one had left that way. Instead, the side of the tent facing the mountain peak was slashed and ripped open. The cuts were straight, methodical, and the searchers could tell from the way the canvas was torn that they had been made, inexplicably, from the inside. A chill deeper than the mountain air settled over the search party. Why would a group of experienced hikers, in the middle of a blizzard on a freezing mountain slope, cut their way out of their only shelter? Peering inside, the mystery only deepened. Everything was still there, neatly arranged. Their sleeping bags were laid out, their backpacks were lined up. Extra clothes, warm sweaters, fur-lined jackets, felt boots called valenki were folded and waiting. A flask of vodka was untouched. There was bread on a small plate and pieces of meat laid out, as if they had been about to have a snack. Their maps, their money, their diaries, all were left behind. Most importantly, 8 or 9 pairs of their sturdy hiking boots were lined up by the entrance. The searchers stood in the biting wind, trying to piece together a story that made no sense. Something had happened inside that tent, something so sudden and so terrifying that it had caused 9 seasoned mountaineers to slash their way out and flee into a lethal, sub-zero blizzard without their coats or their boots. Outside the tent, another chapter of the silent story was written in the snow. A set of footprints led away from the ruined shelter, heading downhill, towards the distant, dark line of the forest, over a mile away. The searchers examined the tracks carefully. There were prints from 8 or 9 people. Some were wearing only socks. Some had a single boot on. Some were completely barefoot. The prints in the snow were a testament to their desperate, unprepared flight. Strangely, the tracks did not look like they were made in a blind panic. They were orderly. The footprints descended the slope in a straight, deliberate line, as if the group was walking together, calmly, away from the tent. There was no sign of a struggle, no other footprints to suggest they were being pursued by anyone or anything. They had simply walked away from their only source of safety and into the deadly cold. The searchers followed the trail of footprints. The tracks continued down the slope for about 500 meters. Then they disappeared, covered by the wind and falling snow of the intervening weeks. The searchers fanned out, their eyes scanning the landscape, calling out names that were answered only by the wind. Their search led them to the edge of the forest, to a tall, ancient cedar tree that stood like a lonely sentinel at the tree line. And it was here, beneath its snow-dusted branches, that they found the first signs of the hikers. There were the remains of a small, hastily built fire. The branches on the cedar tree above were broken up to a height of nearly 15 feet, suggesting someone had climbed the tree perhaps to get a better view or to break off dry wood for the fire. And there, lying side by side in the snow, were the first two of their lost companions, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. The scene was somber and deeply puzzling. They were dressed only in their underclothes. Their hands and feet were bare. It was clear they had fought desperately to stay warm, to start that fire, but the overwhelming cold had claimed them. They lay as if they had simply fallen asleep, their journey over. The search continued. Not far from the cedar tree, heading back in the direction of the tent, they found the next of the hikers. It was Igor Dyatlov, the leader. He was lying on his back, one hand clutching a small birch branch, his face turned towards the camp he had so desperately fled. He was better dressed than the first two, but still inadequately for the conditions. It looked as though he had been trying with his last ounce of strength to make it back to the shelter. A short distance from him, they found Zina Kolmogorova. She too was facing the tent, her body frozen in what looked like the final motion of crawling up the slope. Her hands were raw, her knuckles scraped, as if she had been clawing at the icy snow, fighting to the very end. The strength and spirit that had made her the heart of the group were evident even in this tragic final moment. And then, a little further up the slope, they found Rustam Slobodin. He lay face down in the snow, also seemingly on a path back to the tent. He was the best dressed of the five, but he too had succumbed to the relentless cold. 5 of the 9 were found. They had all perished from hypothermia, the official cause of death. It was a tragedy, but it did not solve the central mystery. What had driven them from their tent in the first place? Why had they run so ill-equipped into a storm where survival was impossible? And where were the other 4? The search for the remaining hikers went on for 2 more months. The winter slowly began to release its grip on the mountains. The snow began to melt, revealing the secrets it had kept. Finally, in May, in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree, buried under more than 10 feet of snow, the last 4 were found. They were Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Nicholas Thibault Brignoles, and Semyon Zolotaryov. They were found huddled together, as if for warmth, in a den they had dug into the snow. They were better dressed than the others. It seemed that after their companions by the fire had passed, they had taken some of their clothes in a desperate attempt to survive, a common and logical practice in such extreme situations. Lyuda's foot was wrapped in a piece of Yuri Krivonishenko's sweater. Semyon was found with Lyuda's camera around his neck. But the discovery of these last 4 brought with it a new, more disturbing layer to the puzzle. Unlike the first 5 who had died of cold, these 4 had sustained massive, severe internal injuries. Nicholas had a fractured skull. Lyudmila and Semyon had multiple broken ribs. The doctor who examined them compared the force required to cause such injuries to that of being hit by a car. Yet, strangely, there were no significant external wounds, no soft tissue damage. It was as if they had been crushed by an immense, overwhelming pressure. And so the puzzle was complete, but the picture it made was no clearer. 9 experienced hikers abandon their tent in the middle of the night. They flee into a blizzard without proper clothing or footwear. They walk calmly downhill to a forest. They try to build a fire. Some of them die of cold while trying to return to the tent. The others build a snow den in a ravine, where they succumb to a combination of cold and horrific internal injuries. The official investigation was closed, with a conclusion that was as mysterious as the events themselves. The hikers, the report stated, had died as a result of, quote, a compelling natural force. The case was classified, the files sealed away for decades, leaving the story to grow into a legend, a ghost story whispered around campfires. But for a bedtime story, we do not need ghosts or monsters. The truth, or what we can piece together of it, is often quieter, more natural, and in its own way, more profound. The mystery of what happened on that mountain slope is not a tale of horror, but a puzzle of nature, a story of how a series of unfortunate natural events could conspire to create a tragedy that seems, at first glance, to defy all logic. Let us gently explore the quiet, scientific whispers that offer a possible answer. Imagine the 9 hikers, asleep in their tent. The wind is howling outside, a constant, deep roar. This is the first piece of the puzzle. The wind. On a mountain slope like that, under specific weather conditions, something called a katabatic wind can occur. It's not just a steady blow. It's a sudden, ferocious avalanche of cold, heavy air tumbling down the mountainside at hurricane speeds. Such a wind could have struck the tent with incredible force, perhaps even flattening it on top of them, creating a terrifying noise and the sensation of being buried. This leads to the second piece of the puzzle, the avalanche theory. For a long time, this was dismissed because there were no signs of a major snowslide. But modern science understands slab avalanches better. It doesn't have to be a huge, thundering cascade. A large, solid slab of packed snow on the slope just above them could have fractured. It might have made a deafening crack, a sound like an explosion. And then, it might have slid just a few feet, settling with immense weight against the side of their tent. To the sleeping hikers, woken suddenly in the pitch dark, the sound and the pressure would have been indistinguishable from a full-blown avalanche. They would have believed they were being buried alive. In that moment, panic would be a natural, human reaction. Their main entrance was downhill, and now blocked by snow and their own gear. The only way out would be to cut through the canvas on the uphill side. This explains the cuts from the inside. They weren't fleeing a creature, they were fleeing a burial. Once outside, they would be disoriented, blasted by the wind and stinging snow, wearing only what they slept in. They would have looked back at the tent, perhaps seeing the settled snowbank against it, and believed the entire slope was unstable, that a second, larger avalanche was imminent. The only logical course of action, in their panicked state, would be to get to a safer location, the tree line, as quickly as possible. This explains why they left their boots and coats. There was no time. They were running for their lives from a threat they believed was about to sweep them away. They moved together, down the slope. The orderliness of their tracks suggests Igor Dyatlov, even in this crisis, was trying to keep his group together, leading them to what he thought was safety. When they reached the tree line, the immediate threat of the avalanche would have seemed to be over. But a new, more insidious enemy was upon them: the cold. Hypothermia sets in with terrifying speed in those conditions. Their first priority would be a fire. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, the 2 strongest perhaps, set to the task. They climbed the tree for dry wood. They worked until their hands were numb, until the cold finally stole their strength and their lives. Seeing their friends perish, the others would have known the fire was a lost cause. Igor, Zina, and Rustem made the desperate decision to try and return to the tent. Perhaps they realized it hadn't been a full avalanche after all. Perhaps they hoped to retrieve their life-saving gear. But the slope was steep, the snow was deep, and their bodies were already shutting down. They fought with every last fiber of their being, but the mountain was too strong. The final 4, led by the veteran Semyon Zolotaryov, made a different tactical choice. They knew they couldn't make it back to the tent. They sought better shelter. They found the ravine, a place out of the wind, and used their remaining strength to dig a snow den. It was a good survival strategy. But the ravine held its own danger. In the dark, in the storm, they wouldn't have known that they were digging their shelter on top of a massive overhang of snow, weakened by the wind and the same conditions that may have caused the initial slab slide. And here, the final, most tragic piece of the puzzle falls into place. As they huddled together in their den, the overhang of snow above them, stressed and unstable, could have collapsed. The weight of tons of compact, heavy snow would have come down upon them in an instant, a localized, powerful avalanche within the ravine itself. This would explain their terrible internal injuries, the crushing force, and the lack of any external wounds. It was the mountain itself, in a final tragic act, that became the, quote, compelling natural force. Alexander Kolevatov, who was found embracing Lyuda, seemed to have been trying to shield her, a final act of friendship in the face of overwhelming power. There is one more theory, a whisper as strange and ethereal as the mountain wind itself. It is the theory of infrasound. Sometimes, when wind moves over a particular landscape, like the dome of Kolatsiakhl, it can create a very low-frequency sound, a vibration so deep that humans cannot hear it with their ears, but they can feel it with their bodies. This infrasound can have bizarre and unsettling effects on the human mind. It can induce a feeling of baseless terror, of profound dread, a physical sensation of panic that has no discernible cause. Perhaps, on that night, the mountain began to hum a terrible, silent song. This infrasound could have filled the tent, waking the hikers with hearts pounding, overcome with an irrational need to flee. It would explain the seemingly illogical decision to run from a perfectly good shelter. They weren't running from something they saw, but from something they felt, a deep, primal terror infused into the very air around them. This could have been the trigger that started the entire chain of tragic events. Perhaps it was a combination of all these things. A powerful wind creating infrasound that caused a panic, the sound of a small slab avalanche confirming their fears, and the desperate, logical, but ultimately doomed attempts to survive that followed. We will never know for certain. The 9 hikers took their secrets with them. There are no monsters in this story, no villains. There is only the immense, impartial, and sometimes terrifying beauty of the natural world. There is the courage and camaraderie of 9 friends who faced the wilderness with joy and respect. Their story is not just about its perplexing end, but about the journey itself. The songs on the train, the shared meals, the laughter in the snow, the determined push towards a shared dream. The pass where they made their final camp is now named Dyatlov Pass in their honor. The mountain Kolatsiachol still stands, its peak often shrouded in cloud, its slopes covered in a deep, silent blanket of snow. The wind still blows across its ridges, and perhaps it still whispers the story of the 9 who came as adventurers and became a part of the mountain's great and enduring mystery. Their story reminds us that some puzzles are not meant to be solved, but to be contemplated. It is a quiet reminder of the fragility of life and the indomitable strength of the human spirit. And as you close your eyes and drift off to sleep, imagine not the end of their story, but its beautiful beginning. Imagine them on the train, their faces bright with hope. Imagine their skis gliding through a silent, sunlit forest. Imagine them sitting together in their tent, sharing a last warm meal. 9 friends united in an adventure, their spirits forever young, forever exploring, under the vast and starry sky of the Ural Mountains. Their journey did not truly end on that cold slope. It simply became a legend, a quiet, mesmerizing story to be told on a winter's night, a story that now has been told to you. And now, it is time to rest. Sleep well,